It's going to have a quick look at heart and blood. Sort of a fairly common thing to be asked about. Starting off with blood then, so you've got 4 components to it. Your red blood cells, I'm just going to put RBC, red blood cells, but useful word to remember is this one, hemoglobin, which is actually a type of protein. And the hemoglobin, of course, carries the oxygen. So what the oxygen will do, it binds, there's another good word, it binds onto the hemoglobin. And what hemoglobin can do is not only can it pick oxygen up, when it gets to a part of the body where the oxygen is needed, perhaps in a muscle, it also releases it. So it can carry it and get rid of it pretty easily. You might have come across something called carbon monoxide, which is that, not CO2 but CO, carbon monoxide. This, if it binds onto hemoglobin, binds permanently, so it can't get rid of it, which means your red blood cells can't carry as much oxygen around, and this is why it's particularly nasty stuff. So red blood cells carry oxygen around the body, the oxygen binds onto the hemoglobin, and it can also be released. We also have white blood cells. I'm just going to put WBC, so me writing it all out, and these are involved in the immune system and also in fighting off pathogens. Of course, these pathogens that come up in Unit 5, 6, 7 and so on. So the immune system and the other various white blood cells, there's lots of different types of them actually. It's not just one type of white blood cell, but they're involved in fighting those pathogens off. We also have platelets, and these are actually a lot more complicated than we go into really at GCSE. These are the small fragments of cells that are involved in blood clotting. Worth remembering here, I suppose, just this little point, that normally these, wrong colour, normally these are found inside of your blood vessels. So if you have a blood vessel here going along, and the platelet, let's put some red blood cells in, there we go. So the platelets are these small fragments. Sometimes people think it's the presence of oxygen that makes these platelets activate. It's not. It's if you can imagine, this is your skin perhaps, and you've cut through your skin and into a blood vessel. Your skin contains a protein called collagen, things like elastin, which makes your skin nice and stretchy. It's if the platelets come into contact with this stuff, these proteins in your skin, that's what then causes them to start sticking together into these blood clots, also known as the thrombus. Okay, so that's what causes the contact with the parts of the skin. And red blood cells then kind of stick into it as well, and you end up with a scab. Okay, so this can happen on the inside of your body, it can sort of happen on the outside as well. You know, the familiar scabbing we see. So that's what platelets are. The last one I think is the most difficult to get your head around. It's plasma. The reason I say it's the most difficult, it's kind of a yellowy coloured liquid. It's the liquid part of blood. In fact, it's about 55% of your blood is actually just this plasma. But it's difficult to really describe what it does or to get your head around it easily. It really is, everything is carried around in the plasma. You know, if you didn't have that, you'd have no fluid to move this stuff along. So it contains dissolved substances like, and it's good to give examples here, things like urea, which has been made in the liver and is then carried off to the kidneys, but also dissolved salts, dissolved nutrients, things like sugars. It also carries proteins around, gone off the bottom there. So lots of things are actually carried in the blood plasma. It's just the liquidy part. So those are your components. Now it's carried around, I think this is a little confusing, the way it's usually mentioned in the books. The 3 blood vessels you need to know are arteries, capillaries and veins. Now the reason I say it's confusing is usually in the book they go arteries, veins, capillaries, and I think it makes more sense if you, let's pick a different colour, let's have green for capillaries. If you remember it in this way, arteries, capillaries, vein, because that's the direction it actually the blood travels through. Arteries through the capillaries into the veins, and back, I suppose you could think of it that way, to the heart. and round you go. Okay, so arteries are going away from the heart. Any blood vessel is carrying, a large blood vessel carrying blood away from the heart is an artery, and the veins are carrying blood in towards the heart. Okay, and that's how you remember it. The arteries, and the main artery in your body is probably about as thick as your finger. It's called the aorta. It's about that kind of thickness. They have a very, very thick wall. Okay, it's got muscle around it, and it's got what you'd call elastic tissue. Elastic means something that will stretch but then go back into its original shape. Okay, and that's what your arteries are doing all the time. As the blood pumps through, they stretch and then snap back into place. The proper term for that is to recoil. And that's what you're feeling when you feel your pulse. You're feeling the artery sort of winding and snapping back. That helps push the blood around. So they're really thick because the blood is under high pressure. Okay, so they've got that typical thick cell wall. Useful term here, the middle of a blood vessel, the space in the middle of it is called a lumen. So if you think of a tube, you know, like a toilet roll or a kitchen roll, the space in the middle, think of it like that, and it's called a lumen. That's a useful term. Okay, and I'll see why in a second. It then goes into the capillaries. The capillaries are very, very thin. Typically, I can't easily draw it here, but you look at things that are less than, or sort of around the diameter of a human hair. So very, very thin. One cell thick, that's the key to it. And they're actually a bit leaky. Things can leak through, liquids can leak out through the walls of the capillaries. They've got tiny little holes in them. Okay, so they're a little bit leaky. Big things like blood cells, you know, blood cell will be kind of this size, a red blood cell. It's too big to get out, so it stays in the blood. But capillaries, things can leak out. Things like oxygen can leak out. Water can leak out, salts can leak out, and things can leak back in. Carbon dioxide can leak back in, for example. Urea can leak back in. And they don't really have very much pressure in them. If they did, they'd burst and pop pretty easily, which is obviously not what you want. The veins carrying the blood back in. Now they have a much thinner wall because the blood is under much lower pressure. Now the reason, you know, I was talking about this word lumen, the lumen is much bigger. In fact, probably a bad drawing, very often when you see veins, instead of being nice and roundy, they're often sort of a flabby kind of shape, not quite as round, because there's just not the blood holding them open. Okay, but the other thing that is really important to remember on veins is that they have valves in them. You know, how easy is that? Veins and valves, and the valves will prevent blood flowing in the backflowing or going back in the wrong direction. So if you imagine a valve like this, a vein, and the valve is kind of that shape. So as the blood comes through, it's pumped through, and as it drops back down, you can think of these valves kind of blood push through, and as it drops back, it closes the valve off. Okay, so it stops the blood coming back through. Sometimes you have problems with these and the valves doesn't quite close properly, and you end up with blood pooling, so the veins kind of get filled with blood, and that's referred to as a varicose veins, quite common in the legs. Quick note on the colour as well. Arteries and veins, if you were to pull them out, would both look pretty much the same colour. They'd look kind of pinky purple colour. The only reason red and blue is used on diagrams is it just makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Oxygenated blood is a different colour, so blood with lots of oxygen in, like it would be in the artery, is more reddish, and the blood in veins is more purplish, but it's not even that sort of too extreme a colour. The blood you would normally see if you cut yourself is the blood from a vein usually. That's the kind of that colour. Arterial blood just looks a bit brighter, but it's not. You know, veins don't carry blue blood around. It's not that big a difference. You won't normally see arterial blood. If you do, you've got problems, because you know, it's a sign of pretty major damage. So arteries, capillaries, veins are the direction it goes in. One other thing to remember with veins, muscles, which would be, you know, sort of on the outside of these veins perhaps, so these things with muscles, they help in moving the blood through, because by the time it gets into the veins it's very low pressure. Sometimes the movement of muscles, just from naturally moving around, will help to move that blood through. And we can also say that we have a double circulatory system as humans. Not all animals have this, but we do. Double circulatory system. Essentially it means blood goes through the heart twice. In other words, let's find a bit of space. Let's just draw a sort of cartoony heart. Blood comes out your heart, goes through the arteries, into the capillaries. That's my green. So here's my very thin capillaries, and this could be in an organ, it could be in the kidneys or the liver or whatever it is, and it comes back through a vein. Okay, so that's one circuit round. It then goes to the lungs. It's going away from the heart, so that would be an artery, to the lungs where it picks up oxygen. Oops, sorry, wrong colour. It's an artery, although it would be coloured blue on the diagrams because it's still low in oxygen. And then this would actually be a vein because it's going back into the heart. So it goes through the heart twice, once to go out, once when it's picked up the oxygen. So that's a double circulatory system.